rest of it. That's one of the things that I hope in the next few years that people are going to figure out is that we can start to figure out exactly who's in a bot network by doing traffic analysis between the members of it.
And it really is going to depend on what the system is that you're analyzing, who's going to have access to the data at what point. Indeed, in a lot of cases, people will set up a contrived system around their subject of interest just so that they can control the places where you watch.
In practice for anonymity networks today, most of the ones that are very large are either volunteer operated or single provider operated. So in the volunteer operated case, to watch both ends, you try to manipulate the routing algorithm as best you can, or just hope you get lucky and wind up at the start and the end of something of interest. And if you wait long enough and paths are randomly generated, which isn't always the case if you're being sensible, but not everyone is sensible, then eventually you will see a sample of your target's traffic. Additionally, as for people who have very large, who can watch a lot of data, so the internet is not a little bunch of small node ISPs that peer with each other in a mom and pop basis. Nearly everything goes over very large backbone ISPs, and nearly all traffic between large providers is exchanged at small numbers of very concentrated exchange sites. These are points of vulnerability for data collection point of view. There's been a couple of papers about, so how many points do you actually need to watch in order to get a view of most of the traffic entering and leaving your typical anonymity network? And the answer is, if you can get the right couple of, if you can bribe the right 4 or 5 people at level 3, you're pretty much set for 70–80% of the traffic.
Or even buy them a beer and get them to slip the right little thing that will allow you to then to leapfrog things. There are also other things that people think are useful that may not be. For example, running things on alternate ports. Running something on an alternate port is not going to help you if Ricardo can tell whether or not it's IRC traffic. He's going to know that it's IRC traffic because he can pull this out of an IPsec tunnel. He can extract out what's what type of traffic. So running something on an alternate port isn't really going to help because they can tell still. If somebody is in fact looking at, say, imagine you have a compromised node that is using something like port knocking. I will hit port 50,000 and then it will open up port 137 and I'll use 137 for something. Traffic analysis is going to figure this out. Really, you just start seeing the patterns come right out and they leap there. And these are things that somebody can do as defensive techniques in addition to surveillance techniques, is that you can figure out what a hostile node is doing based upon patterns that it's doing that are not necessarily obvious to the people who did it. Yeah. No.
Has anyone looked at the security of these PNAPs that you're talking about? Because that would probably be the best point of entry for anyone. Just a regular idiotic hacker.
The question was, has anybody looked at the security of these PNAPs because that's the obvious point of entry for a hacker?
I have.
What's the security like?
I've been kind of yelling at them for about 5 years about what they need to do, and the concerns of the ISP community are primarily operational and only secondary security. They don't suck. They're not awful, but there are things that I think that they could do to improve how they are setting up now. And they've made improvements over the last 5 years, but a lot of what goes on in the operational ISP community, they need to see a demonstrable physical attack or a demonstrable working exploit in the wild before they consider that it's a big serious problem. And a lot of the things that are less proven in the oh my god look sense are sort of backburnered until they become a real problem. And there are working groups and there are people who are concerned about this, but it takes a certain amount of inertia that needs to be overcome. And so it's not as good as it could be.
What kind of physical measures do they employ?
What kind of physical measures do they employ?
Usually you have to be on a list of approved people in order to get into the site. There have been pen tests where people have subverted that, showing up wearing the correct uniform and saying, yep, I'm here to fix your electricity, but that's gotten better over the past several years. They usually have cages protecting all the equipment and circuits that are relatively physically shielded, but that only goes as far as the building. If you're outside the building and you cut the power, they're still screwed. They do have backup generators on site, but we saw actually a lot of disaster recovery covers these same bases where, when something like September 11th happened, a lot of the naps that were in New York City and downtown had to run on the backup generators, and getting fuel to those over the destroyed streets kind of pushed that time limit. So we see sort of test cases in awful scenarios like that.
So then what's the security like at the disaster recovery sites? Because if you cut the power from the primary site and have your attacker at the
Is this on topic?
that's where you need to be.
Well, it's not that they have separate failover sites. Some of them do, some of them don't. The question was, what's the security like at the disaster recovery sites? But a lot of them have on-site, at the primary site, backup generators and things like that are meant to cover the physical infrastructure.
Jim, did you have a question?
I just have a separate question. It's more research-oriented on the traffic analysis, described as being primordial, sort of, and I had a question on this. Are you aware of any research into flip fraud and the application of traffic analysis through flip fraud? Do you think this would be a good tool for that?
The question was, do I know of anything about applying traffic analysis to click fraud and other forms of? I do not know. I don't know of any. I believe that would be precisely the sorts of things that would be useful for this. I mean, that some of the stuff that we were talking about is that old things that were OS hacks ages ago that have come up again is that if you have something that is driven by a timer, it's going to go off at the 1/100th of a second, plus or minus interrupt delays and so on and so forth. So if you start seeing clicks coming in that are all correlated to a single clock, which you only need for Fourier analysis to come out of, you might deduce that might be click fraud, just like you might deduce that these $1 purchases might represent a stolen credit card.
Yeah, and if I can sort of generalize that, one of the really neat things about this field from a traffic analysis research point of view, and one of the really unfortunate things about this field from a resisting traffic analysis point of view, is that the math you need to do traffic analysis is far simpler than the techniques that you use to try to resist any degree of traffic analysis. So for instance, currently the best techniques against high latency mixed nets don't really require anything much more complicated than summation, long division, and maybe a couple of matrix multiplies if you really care that much. Yeah. This is not something that you need this is not something you need 2 or 3 years of statistics to write decent papers about and find new things in. Several years of statistics would help, but honestly, intro high school statistics will still break nearly all naive designs on resisting this stuff.
Yeah.
And I would not think you would need anything more complicated than long division and some ad hoc techniques to do timing analysis on the first 20 click fraud algorithms you would come up with.
Yeah, the creativity is going to be where all of you come up with the, oh my God, I know I can solve a problem with that. Just like Jim said, click fraud. We could detect click fraud this way. There's going to be all sorts of things where he'll say, geez, I'll bet we could do that. And the rest of us who've been thinking about this haven't had the time or the inclination to apply it to whatever we're doing. But this is a great technique that has not been used, and it's extraordinarily powerful, and it's extraordinarily hard to defend against. So that means that no matter which side you're on as an attacker or a defender, it's a great tool for you. I believe that we're about done here, so I'm going to just leave it at that unless there's anyone who wants to say anything else. Nope, we're done.